Let me start with a statistic that should not really exist. Over the past year, roughly once a month, someone here in Texas has called me in the middle of a crisis. This has been a parent in an emergency room, a spouse who needed to be admitted to the hospital, people who reached out because they know I spent my time helping folks navigate a system that was really not built for them. And in every single one of those cases, without exception, the hospital said the same thing to me: no inpatient beds available. Every single one, 100% of the time. Now, in statistics, when you get a perfect 100% result, it usually means one of two things. Either you've made an error somewhere or somebody else has. I went looking for the error, and what I found was not a shortage. Instead, it was a business model. Here's the version you probably heard. Hospitals are overwhelmed, demand is surging, the population is aging, and the system is simply just out of room. You've seen the headlines warning of a national hospital bed shortage by 2032. It is a tidy story, and it has the great advantage of letting everyone off the hook, in my mind. Nobody chose it, it just happened. That is a lovely story, but let's look at the numbers behind it. The average hospital occupancy in the United States really has gone up. It's set around 64% for the decade before the pandemic, and in the year after the public COVID epidemic ended, it hit roughly 75%. So far, the shortage story actually holds. Then you read the actual study, and this is from the JAMA Network Open. It was published in 2025 by researchers out at UCLA, and they used federal occupancy data across thousands of hospitals. And they found that the rise in occupancy was not driven by more people getting sick, but by hospitals cutting the supply of staffed beds. The number of staffed beds fell from about 800,000 to about 674,000. Roughly 128,000 beds were taken out of service. Read that again. The hospitals did not fill up because the country got sicker. They filled up because they made themselves smaller. If you remove enough chairs, you can make any empty room look like a sold-out show. And this is the part that really matters. When a hospital reports its occupancy, it measures against staffed beds, not licensed beds. A licensed bed is one the hospital is allowed to operate. A staffed bed is one with a nurse actually assigned to it. If you close a ward and send the nurses home, then those beds vanish from the math entirely. The hospital can then report with a completely straight face that it's running at capacity. The math is not wrong here. The math is simply not measuring what you think it is. The OECD, or the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, for what it's worth, concluded years ago that staffing, not the number of beds, is the real constraint on capacity. Now, you might say if hospitals are short on space, surely they are building, and they are. Drive through any Texas metro and you will see the cranes in many of those hospital areas. But watch what goes up. It is not inpatient wards. In 2022, medical office and outpatient buildings made up about $18 billion of the roughly $43 billion in U.S. healthcare construction, about 42%. More than double the share from a decade earlier. The hospital finance industry's own trade group calls outpatient facilities the growth engine of construction. Surgery centers, imaging suites, clinics, office buildings for the physicians that they now employ, all high margin, all very nice, and you can spend $1 billion on gleaming new outpatient real estate without adding a single bed that a genuinely sick person can actually lie down in. A number of systems have managed exactly that. If hospitals are truly out of room, they have a very peculiar way of showing it. At this point in the story, a hospital executive will tell you the problem is actually nurses. They simply cannot find them. People just love to blame access on nursing shortages, by the way. Let us look at that too. There are about 5.6 million active registered nurse licenses in this country. Nursing school output has been rising for years, and pass rates are very stable. The pipeline is not empty. It has, if anything, been growing. We have been told there are not enough nurses for about 20 years now. In that same 20 years, we have graduated an enormous number of nurses. At some point, you'd have to wonder whether the word shortage here is doing some very heavy lifting in the story. The honest picture is that this is a retention problem, not a supply problem. Nurses are leaving the bedside, and the reasons they give are burnout, workload, understaffing, and pay, of course, which is a delightful little loop when you think about it. The lean staffing that keeps the wards dark is the same lean staffing that makes the job unbearable, which drives nurses out, which they then cite as the reason they cannot staff the wards. I will be fair. Federal analysts do project a modest shortfall in full-time nurses later this decade. The shortage is not imaginary, it is just in large part self-inflicted. So if the beds and the nurses are a choice, where's the money actually going? Because this is the part I find genuinely alarming. Nonprofit hospitals sit on an average of around 218 days of cash on hand. That is not an organization scraping by. That is an organization that could stop collecting revenue entirely for 7 months and still make payroll. After COVID, operating margins recovered to around 5%. Capital spending jumped, and a 2025 analysis found that hospitals' excess cash was associated with more spending on buildings and executive pay, but not, and I want to be precise here, not with more charity care. Then there is the tax angle. A 2024 study in JAMA put the total value of the nonprofit hospital tax exemption at about $37 billion in a single year. These are nonprofits in the strict technical sense that they have simply found other places for the profit to go. And the Loan Institute found that a majority of them, about 54%, spent less on community benefit than their tax exemption was worth. Here's why this should bother you as an employer, anyone running a business, by the way. When a hospital closes a ward and sends its nurses home, the price you pay does not move. The rate was contracted in advance. It is fixed. Your employee is charged exactly the same whether they're admitted in 20 minutes or spend 9 hours boarding in the emergency room next to the vending machines. I watched this happen in real time. A patient in a major Texas metro hospital, a system with more than 10 facilities, and one radiologist on call to read MRIs. One. The patient waited more than 6 hours in the ER for the read of that MRI. The Joint Commission incidentally says boarding should not exceed 4 hours on patient safety grounds. Healthcare may be the only industry where the service can quietly collapse and the invoice stays exactly the same. In a normal market, worse service at the same price loses you customers. Here, it improves the margin. So there is a recent and reasonable argument that employers should demand evidence that hospitals are running efficiently before accepting the next price increase. I agree with it. It was in a Fortune magazine. I would encourage you to read it. I would just add a second demand. Not only prove your operations are efficient, but prove your patients are actually being served. And if you're a nonprofit skipping taxes in the name of community benefit, I have a modest proposal. Availability should be part of the deal, a measurable standard. A patient who needs a bed should not wait more than 2 hours for one 95% of the time. The IRS has strong opinions about your paperwork. It has none whatsoever about your bed capacity. That seems like the wrong way around to me. So the next time you hear that there are no beds available, remember that this is very rarely a statement about the building. It is a statement about a spreadsheet. The shortage is real in the sense that you cannot get a bed. It is manufactured in the sense that the bed exists, the license exists, and the only thing missing is a decision to staff it. We have built a system that gets paid the same whether it serves you well or leaves you in a hallway. And then we act surprised that it keeps choosing the hallway 100% of the time. If you found this useful, subscribe so you do not miss the next one. All the sources and the deeper analysis are in the Substack post linked in the description.